It is 10:01. Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Lee, Executive Director of Friends of the Children Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us. Our real talk about race and equity in foster care. I have the great pleasure of having one of our board members and co-founders of BME with us. He's done some amazing work around the country as well as the world with Fortune 500 companies, as well as organizations like Friends of the Children to help us find better words, better spirits in order to help change the story and create a just and free society for the children that we serve. And so I want to make sure you all get his voice and let him plant a seed with you before we begin. And just to give you a little sense of how today's call will go, after Benjamin, I'm just going to make sure that we all level set with some information about some of the current realities of foster care. And just to make sure that we all have some of the similar words and ideas and data in mind. None of it's going to be new. I think we all know some of the terrible statistics that have been persistent for decades and haven't shown signs of much change. But today, I think where we want to go is, what are we going to do about it? There's a lot of things at play. I think we all know the reason for a call like this. There are major protests happening not only around the country, but around the world. People are paying attention to the plight of Black people here in the United States, and as well as in how they're treated in other places around the world. And there's a beautiful cross-racial coalition of largely led by young people that have finally said, you know what, it's time to stop this nonsense. It's time to do something different and change. And so with that, we have to embrace it and keep pushing this along. So let me bring Benjamin in here for a second. Benjamin, thank you again for joining us this morning. How would you like to introduce yourself and share a couple of thoughts with our group that's joined us this morning?
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending which part of the world you're in, or evening. I'm excited to be a part of the Friends family, to serve as an LA board member. I was introduced to Friends last year, and it has been an amazing journey, the work that's being done, and the transformation that has taken place as far as how we view and look at the families that we serve and the friends who are serving those families. And I've been happy to be a part of and lead Friends on this journey. As we open this conversation, if you're listening to anyone who is a change maker, a freedom fighter, an agent of change, everyone is saying the same thing, that this moment feels different. We've always fought, racial inequities and always fought for social justice, but this feels different. There are many different factors that are contributing to the difference in this moment. But this is a pivotal moment in our lifetime where we'll be able to look back and say, where did I stand in 2020? What side of the aisle was I on in 2020? We've had an international pandemic, which we'll be marking for the rest of our lives. We'll always refer back to how this changed our moment. And then now how we, humans who were already quarantined, stressed, no job, working, all of these factors that contribute to, pressure on top of watching our fellow brother be killed at the hands of police brutality. It just added immense pressure to the fight. And so major changes are sweeping the country and will continue to sweep the country. We just have to ask ourselves, what side of the aisle was I on? Where did I stand? Did I use my voice? As I was in school and would learn about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and I'd say, wow, if I was in Delta, I'd be out there marching and I'd be doing this and I'd be doing that. And I would ask relatives, what were you doing? And shamefully, a lot of them said nothing. But the look of shame and the regret in their face was, I wish I would have done something. And it didn't necessarily have to be a march or outside, but contributing something towards the fight for equity and justice for and oppressed people. And so that's the question that I want everyone to internalize and think about. Where did I stand in 2020 and what did I do?
Thank you for that, Benjamin. So just a quick reminder, this call is being recorded. We want to be able to use it for future learning opportunities for our organization. And then hopefully, well, this may not be the last time that we pull this together. And we may have a series of these conversations and of course may invite more friends to be a part of it. So with that said, I want to move forward and just show you a few slides just so we can all be on the same page. Here we go.
Can't hear you, Thomas. You're muted. This is why we love administrative teams, because you keep us going. You're still muted.
There we are.
There you go.
Yeah, somebody had the governor on my unmute. Here we are. Can everyone see that?
No.
Nope. Okay, here we go. We need screen sharing shared. I think it got locked up somewhere. There we are. All right. So just a little backdrop. When we all think about foster care, I think it's important for us to have some of the critical numbers to keep in mind of how massive our system is in the United States. So we're talking about roughly 440,000 children across the country. California has the infamous distinction of having over 55,000 children in foster care, with the lion's share being right here in Los Angeles County. And when you think about foster care, I would imagine for all of us, there's lots of different connotations and images and thoughts that come to mind when you think about children in foster care. What caused them to be there? What is their experience like once they enter? What are all the different iterations of foster care? Children living with relatives, children living with foster families, children living in group homes, and then of course, children bouncing from one place to the next because it's hard for them to find a place where they're going to be completely embraced and loved. I think one of the things we ought to also add to that context is how does it break down in terms of race? Again, when you think about foster care, at least for me in doing this work for over 2 decades, many people always come up with the images that foster care is largely inhabited by children of color. There's definitely a large population of children of color, Black and Latino. But if you see here from the data from across the country, 44% of all the children in foster care are also white. And that number has gone up, as you see, from 2007 all the way to 2017. But when we think about the disparities that are in foster care, when we think about population, 31% of foster care being inhabited by children of color, at least Black children, is certainly something should make us all pause, as well as the growing number of Latino children that are going into foster care. And so again, step back for a second, and we think about some of the stories that we all hear and the narratives that we've all heard many, many times of why children go into foster care. We tend to always gravitate to abuse. That somehow that these children were in some of the most abusive and violent households, when in reality, more children are placed, probably more than 2/3 of all children are put into foster care because of neglect. And then we also have to put some images to the neglect. What does neglect look like? Well, neglect could be an absence of basic needs. Maybe the water's not running because the bill wasn't paid. Or maybe because There's not enough materials to clean house, and someone took offense on how the living conditions for a child were at a particular moment in time. It also could mean the child was left alone for a period of time. That period of time could be 10 minutes, it could be 4 days. And then lastly, of course, for lack of food. Those are all different reasons why children are taken out of the custody of their biological parents. And then, of course, there's also the reality of illness being a reason why children have taken out of care, incarceration, and drug abuse, and then, of course, death. All of those different reasons are pulling children away from the inner circles of their families. And then, of course, they end up in many of the people that are represented on this call in our care. And then when we disaggregate this just a little bit more and just focus and narrow in on California, we get a sense of looking at some of the trajectories of children over the course of their young lives. So what you're looking at right now, our friends from the USC Data Center shared this amazing presentation about a year and a half ago at the Conrad Hilton's National Foster Care Convening. And this breaks down the number of children that are referred to foster care or to DCFS and Child Protective Services over the course of their 18 years of life. You look at the gray line, that represents the entire state of California. And if you look at the red line, that shows the arc of children born right here in the county of Los Angeles. You see that almost 1 in 3 of all children born in the county of Los Angeles are reported to Child Protective Services. When we break that down even further and look at it along racial lines, the numbers are even more stark. So one of the things when I first saw this, before I go into this data a little bit, first thing that jumped out to me, which is probably jumping out to many of you, is that if you look at the caption at the very top of this graph, it says children born in LA County in 1999. And so of course, my first question was, well, do we have any more recent data to show what's happening to children? And our good friend, Emily Putnam Hornstein, responded with, nothing has changed. They're still the same. So 20 years later, we still are seeing almost 1 in 2 of all Black children being reported to foster care by the time they turn 18. 1 in 3 Latino children being reported to foster care by the time they turn age 18. And 1 in 4 white children being reported to foster care by age 18. And then, of course, the margins drop off a little bit more for Asian and Pacific Islander children. And so as you look at those numbers over time, there's certainly opportunities for change. There's also opportunities for us to do more work around prevention, but there's also some very stark realities for these children. First of all, if we look at along the bottom of that graph in terms of age, once a child is around 12, 13, and 14 years old and they're exposed to foster care, specifically Black boys, the chances that they're going to stay in foster care and age out of foster care are tremendous. There are not many adopted parents and people looking to adopt Black boys in their early teens or mid-teens. And so they're doomed to finish. And so the question is, what resources and interventions are we going to put in place to support those children? The same thing as we look down further on this scale and look at some of the younger children. That's usually the tender ages where children are still seen as innocent, as equally valuable. There's equal value in all of them. And so more people are more apt to look to adopt, to foster a child, and to bring them to their homes. That's a possible area for us to start doing greater work. And so I think really the question that I would love for all of you to start thinking now is not about trying to fix foster care, but how can we build something new? We've always, like I said, known this data. We've always known that these were persistent issues, but we can't just keep trying to fix something that's not working well. And so that brings us to the issue of equity. And this was a term that's certainly thrown around often, and we talk about it for many, many years, and it's grown over time from equality, and then it merged into the idea of equity. And so when you think about equality, we think about when was the first great precedent about equality brought into our consciousness? Well, Plessy versus Ferguson was that Supreme Court case where the conversation was all about separate but equal. And so if you look at the first box, everyone has an equal box, but not everybody has an equal access to see the game and be a part of that game. And of course, moving on along the continuum, equity is that everyone gets whatever they need in order to be a part of the game, but there's still barriers in place that prevent us from being at our full power. And really the ultimate goal should be justice. And one of the things that I think Benjamin and I were talking about is that we have a long road to go, and this is just the beginning. In fact, this is a battle. The incidents that have been happening all over the country around police brutality, gross negligence, anti-Black racism, these are issues that have been pestering us for hundreds of years. And now they're in full view of us all today. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? And how do we ultimately get justice as the center of some of the efforts to create greater law and order? You can't have law and order if it's not centered in justice and freedom and it being at the core. And so when I think about these issues, I have to also revert back to my love of history. And one of the things that I think that history provides us with is a template for how do we need to be moving today. And interesting enough, I found this quote from Martin Luther King on March 31st, 1968. This was 5 days before he was killed. And he raises this question about will and knowledge. And so he says that this is America's opportunity, which I believe we have it at this moment in time again, to help bridge the gulf between the haves and have-nots. The question is whether America will do it. There's nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. The real question is whether we have the will. And that's really been ultimately the question that's been posed to us all for many, many years, is do we have the will? And so one of the things I'd like to start off and kick off this conversation with you, Benjamin, is to look at the willpower. We have all the knowledge in the world. We are seeing young people coming together of all walks of life, marching, protesting. They're showing their anger and frustration. They want to see change. They don't want to relive the 60s all over again if it just means that we're going to continue going down this path. And so I know that you are active and you are not only help transforming organizations, but you're also on the ground with the people. As Dave Chappelle said recently, the streets are talking. And so you're amongst the streets. And so when you think about all the things that you've seen, what do you see as some of the things that we need to be considering now if we're going to really start to move the needle on this issue once and for all?
As you were talking, so many things were just going about where to jump in. And so, just to bring people where I am, I've been out. I've been blessed to have space in boardrooms. I've been blessed to have space in City Hall, but I've also been blessed to have space on the ground with the people. And so I've been out all for the past week and a half, lifting our voice. And for 2 of the days I was out, was chased and shot at by the police, witnessed children being shot at, witnessed senior citizens being shot at. And it really, it disgusted me and disturbed me, but it woke up something inside of me that probably never went back to sleep. And it woke me up to the reality of, the value of our lives. And what that means in the eyes of the law. And so, there are many people who don't believe that white supremacy is real. There are many people that don't believe, the systemic issues that plague our communities are real. But the data speaks, right? So when you look at the data, you're looking at housing discrimination, you're looking at redlining, you're looking at voter suppression. And so no matter what you may believe, the data speaks for itself. Now, we as a civilization and as human beings have been able to advance in technology. We can speak to someone on video who is thousands of miles away in another country. We've sent someone to the moon, but yet we are still dealing with the issues of not just racism, because I can't legislate how you feel, but I can legislate how you treat me. I can legislate what is legal and not legal. And so we've been able to do these amazing things, but haven't been able to advance in this area. When Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were fighting for equity and fighting for jobs and fighting for opportunity for African Americans, white people make 7 times more than Black people. Today, that number is 6.6 times more. A white person who has a high school diploma makes more on average than a Black person with a college degree. And so the numbers and the data is there, right? We see that. The question is, what can we do in our own power to fight social injustice and racial inequities? So in the scope rather of your work and what you can do, have you, one, identified the social inequities that are facing the people that you serve? And if you haven't recognized them and come to terms with them, then you can't be effective in solving the problem, right? Black kids, Black and brown kids are suspended from school at high rates. Black and brown kids are disciplined at high rates. Black and brown youth are arrested at higher rates. Black and brown youth are, sentenced to jail, and parents are sentenced to jail. There's so many different issues that are plaguing the people that you serve. And if you haven't identified them, come to terms with them, and accept the reality of what they are, it's impossible for you to then stand on the right side of history and fight social injustice in your realm. So that's the first step, will be to identify what's impacting the people that I'm serving from a racial inequity, social injustice perspective.
So you said something that I'm going to tell you that I've been thinking about for a long, long time. There was a film that came out years ago called A Civil Action. I think the star of the movie was John Travolta, and he was a civil attorney and civil defense attorney. And at the very beginning of the movie, he talks about the value of certain people in many of his cases. He talks about how much money he usually can settle for a white man and how much money you can settle for a middle-aged Black man. And when I remember when I watched that, I think it came out when I was in my mid-20s, that's when it first dawned on me that that there's so many layers to the issue of racism and injustice. There's so many layers in terms of looking at the value of life. And so when you think about all the major religions, me growing up in a very religious household, when you think about all the major religions, all of them have a common denominator that all children are valuable in the eyes of God, have equal value in the eyes of God. But the place where all children don't have equal value is in our society. In the many years of our work, and I'm sure many of the folks on this call have heard this before, but even when children are first born, there's a different value placed on their lives at birth. If you get a chance, please Google and look up some of the articles on the cost of adopting a Black child versus adopting a white child. The cost of adopting a Black child is a fraction of the cost compared to adoption of white children. Also, when I look at the work in our expansion, so Friends of the Children recently began providing services up in the Antelope Valley region, and a part of the Antelope Valley infusion work that's happening there, a lot of the community providers and systems are looking at ways to support families in a more intentional way. And one of the things that they're trying to target first is, how is it that Black parents with children are reported to DCFS at higher rates than other children from other races for the exact same things? And so again, the value is very different, and we are not addressing that value. And the other part that jumps out, and I want you to jump in here, is that I think about what you said about we can't legislate morals and love, and we can't legislate how people feel about one another. But if we were to start with the beauty of innocent children, by no fault of their own, they just happen to be born in a certain period of time in a certain place, that they have to inherit all of this because we haven't done the work to clear the way for them to be completely free of all of those encumbrances themselves. And so my question to you is that when you, and I would imagine everybody on this call, when they're thinking about, when they hear all of these issues, what can they do? And what can we do together to start to make change? Because this seems so daunting. It's so easy for someone to throw up their hands and go back into their own world.
Mm-hmm. The first thing we can do is think about the picture that we are painting for the people that we're serving. What path are we leading them on, right? And one that has to come through aggregated data, right? Following the lives of the people that we're serving, what happened to them because of us. And if you don't know what happened to them because of you, then you are failing. And we only have I don't have time to play softball and be nice with my words. So please don't take offense. It is what it is. And so, if you don't know how your work is impacting the people that you're serving, then you're failing. Two, and it's not done intentionally. These are systems in place that we are brought into. This is orthodoxy. This is common procedure that we're taught. We're trained in this way, and we continue to move in that vein. So one, you have to understand the pipeline. Where are you leading people? And I'll give you an example of a failing system. The welfare system is a failing system. The welfare system, if you can have a grandmother, a mother, and a child on the same welfare system, you clearly are not leading them to a path of equity. Your programming, your resources, your assistance is not leading them to a path of equity. I tell you what program that puts you off the system is the unemployment program, which many people are experiencing right now. Every week you have to look for a job. And once your money runs out, that's it. You gotta go get a job and fend for yourself. So that is an example of a program where they want you off, they lead you out. The welfare system is cyclical. It's just generations have been in that program. So you have to look at your program, follow the system. Where does it lead people to? If it's not a path to equity, if it's not a path to where they can then take care of themselves, fend for their family, grow, and become productive members of society, then what work are you really doing? Are you just put a Band-Aid over it, or are you stitching it up and healing it? So that's the first question you ask. Two, you have to better understand the people that you serve. And if all you know about them, and this is the work that I've been doing for the past 7 years, if all you know about them is, their deficit story, or the story that talks about, the negative, or, the negative stats. When I was doing research for Friends, I was trying to come up with all of these positive stories and stats about people who, been through the foster care system, have been adopted. It was so hard to find anywhere. And so one, if you're not tracking that data, there's no possible way for you to know which path leads them to real and true equity. And I'll give an example. And while I am pulling up this slide, for those of you, who's shaking your heads, I got the whole thing viewing. I'm looking at everybody. I don't just want to look at myself. If you can think of any social inequities or systemic issues that the people that you're serving may be facing, just put in the chat group. Just put in the chat. Just want to get an idea of, what you recognize systemically is hindering the people that you're serving. I know we all come from different backgrounds, so I'm not sure what areas you specifically work in. I see a lot of Friends folks here, but specifically for your work, what systemic issues are plaguing the people that you are serving? Because that is the first step to solving the real problem. A lot of times we try to fix up the person and throw them back into a burning house versus addressing the house that's on fire. You can't read, you have low education. The books that they have for school are from 1970. It's 40 kids in the classroom. In Baltimore, for a winter, there was no heat, but they expected the kids to still come to school and pass all these tests, and they're hungry. So it's not the child's fault, but this is the issue, and we have to address that. Now, I want to pull up this slide. I'm disabled. I can't share my screen. Can you help me? And Thomas, if you want to go through the chat and call some of those things out loud while I'm getting my screen shared, that would be great.
Absolutely. No, I'm seeing some of the participants on our call talking about access to food, clean, healthy water. Of course, that makes us all think about Flint, Michigan, and the fiasco that happened there. Access to equal education certainly comes to mind. I appreciate Mo for adding that. Jonathan Kozol, who's written very thoughtfully on this issue for years about the investment that's put in our most needy, our most vulnerable children compared to the investment to children that have lots of protections in place is completely disproportionate, and requires all of us to really reevaluate that whole system. We're talking about safe communities, benefits in healthcare, and of course, access to credit and capital, which is so essential in an environment that we all live in. When I think just the other day, just to digress, and I think you're about ready to pull up your slide, I was a part of a focus group with the Weingart Foundation, and they were talking about, there was some predictions being made that quite a number of nonprofits that are led by Black executive directors and CEOs will disappear in the next year. And a lot of that is really connected to access to capital and access to individuals and friendships and relationships that can help them get through tough times like these. And this is, again, where we all can come together and be able to provide mutual cross-sectional, cross-racial support if we're going to really make a difference. And I think that's really the key. Go ahead.
Yep. I'm going to send it to one of you, and maybe you can share it because it's still not letting me share. But I'll talk through while I am sharing. You know, there's this whole movement now, which is it's really fundamental, but it's also being weaponized. The movement to defund the police. And so, granted, the organizers on the ground they don't specialize in marketing. They don't specialize in messaging. They specialize in standing up for their life. And they're tired of seeing their fellow brothers and sisters killed. Even if they are breaking the law, it is not deserving of your life being taken away. You know, so I want to even state that. Forget being killed for being innocent, being killed for breaking the law, crossing the street, your light being out, you've fallen asleep in a Burger King parking lot. I mean, none of these things are warranting death. And so they're tired. And so the only thing that they know how to do is attack the agency that is allowing this to happen. So defunding the police is a part of a comprehensive plan to reallocate some of the major funding that goes into policing. Here in Los Angeles, the police department holds the largest budget on the city's budget, $3 billion. $3 billion. And many of us, if we were running businesses, we'd be trying to figure out, why am I spending $3 billion on the police? So the council at the petitioning of Black Lives Matter here in Los Angeles cut $150 million from the budget. Now, a lot of the issues that and I'm just making the connection, a lot of the issues that we typed out in our chat, does anybody want to think about what $150 million could do for those issues?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Does anybody see the connection of why we need to defund and in proper terms, reallocate the funding that is, you know, allowing these agencies to continue to grow? Money is power and wielding power, and they're paying off these police commissions that are supposed to be oversight, et cetera. Can anybody see the connection with reallocating the funds here to programs that actually can build our community? Instead of calling 911 for someone who's having a mental breakdown, you will call a counselor. You know, instead of calling the police for non-emergencies, somebody sleep in a parking lot, you know, having a counselor or someone else go handle the issue. And so that's what the rally cry is for. We've named a whole bunch of systemic issues that that are plaguing the people that we serve, and a lot of money, you know, states and cities always cry we don't have funding for $150 million could clear off Skid Row here in LA. Solve the homeless issue right here in LA, because downtown is just plagued, but we always cry we don't have the money. Well, the money is there. It is just tied up in a system, and the more of us who are not speaking up about it, why would a council person or a mayor make a change when nobody's making any noise about it? Right. And that's because we didn't know about it. And Thomas, I'm going to throw it to you as I send these slides over.
Sure. No, I just want to just to reiterate that just for a second. A couple of different points. One, I think that any government line item should always be up for critique. And like you said, allocating dollars where they could do the most good should be a process that is done across all governmental agencies when they're going through the budgeting process. I used to be an educator. I'm sure there's some educators in this group chat. I see Ann Ludlow in there. I think we all know a little something about when there's cuts in education. We hear about them time and time again. In fact, Gavin Newsom just recently said there's going to be cuts in the California state budget around social services, mental health services. Nonprofits are preparing for shortfalls across the board when it comes to delivering services. So we all know what cuts are. No agency should be above those cuts being applied to them if they're not doing the most good. If I think on a larger scale, our federal budget for the military is gigantic. If we just could get a small slice of that, 2-3%, we could do a lot of great work with that. And so no one should be above that. On another, staying on the macro level for a second, when I think about funders and the money that is given out, there should be more consideration about doing more impact grants and opening and raising the ceiling about how much is given on a yearly basis so we can really fund things to make a difference and make change. And so that means not sitting on $50 billion worth of assets here in LA County, but raising the floor of how much is given. And then those are real critical steps people can make. And then of course, leveraging the social capital of a lot of funders and people and wealthy individuals have. They have the social capital to not only support officials and individuals that could help drive policy and legislation that could go in the direction that's going to support children and disadvantaged families. I think those are a couple of things. And of course, as we keep talking, we're going to whittle it down to the individual. All of you, I would imagine, are on this call because you already care. We have to start evangelizing those that don't care about this as much as we do. And it starts with maybe evangelizing members in our family. I would imagine I know I have family members that are in law enforcement and best friends. And many of them are right along with us in some of these issues. They just may not agree with the methods. And how do we help start evangelizing, not only starting with our own families, our own circles of influence, and then building that out so we create a multiplier effect when it comes to the number of people that care and want to see change. So I think, let's see if we are ready for the slides you want to share with us, Benjamin.
Yep, I sent it to you.
Okay.
You can either pull it up or make me the host and then I can share. And to Thomas's point about individual evangelizing, we're preaching to the choir. You're here, right? You're here to learn, you're here to experience, but there are a lot of people who just simply don't know. And, we sometimes blame racism for people's ignorance, but sometimes people just don't know. It was not the environment they grew up in. They didn't grow. I mean, if you're in a white family in a white neighborhood, you're not growing up learning about Black rights. You're not growing up with a wealth of Black history because it's been removed from our schools. We hear about the peaceful Martin Luther King, but we don't necessarily, they're even changing in school books the word slave to, servant, or, all these other words that don't speak to slavery and the brutality of what slavery was. Oh, one book said they brought workers over from, Africa. So, there's a lot out there that is not being taught anymore. And so I don't expect you to know. And some people do. But when you're at an involved state where you understand where people and you can appreciate and value where people come from, but there is go to the second one first, Thomas. Okay. Yeah. there is, you know, now no excuse for you not to know. I mean, clearly video footage, but Google is out here. And then we have a responsibility to then evangelize and help people if this is where, you know, your heart is. So I want to talk about what you personally know. Again, this is about personal responsibility in this space. What you personally know about the people that you are serving, because your narrative dictates your decision. And if all you know is the negative side, the bad side, the horror stories about the people that you serve, how can you possibly lead them to a path of equity when you don't even know what that path looks like for them? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this first one, for those who can access the chat group, for number one, if you've heard, said, or repeated that foster children have severe emotional or behavioral issues that make family life challenging, just type yes in the chat group. If you heard, said, or repeated it. Okay, I see a lot of yeses. For number two, if you've heard, said, read, repeated that foster children are more likely to function at a lower level in school and repeat grades more often and earn poor grades, just type me in the chat group, me. I want to distinguish the questions, just type me. If you are familiar with stats that say the Black unemployment rate is higher than the national average, if you've heard that, if you said it, repeated, or read it, just type, you can type in yes this time. I can distinguish between the two and see. Yes. Okay, now all of these are narratives about, you know, someone's struggle. You know, mental health issues, educational failure, societal burden. These are the narratives that we know about the people that we serve. Thomas, you can go to the other one. Okay. So if you have heard, said, or read, or familiar with how many states have either a federally or state-funded extended foster care plan, just type yes. Great. If you are familiar with stats on how many foster youth want to go to college, and be careful because I might ask you what the stats are because I've done the research. If you are familiar with stats on how many foster youth want to go to college, type me. A few me's. I'm going to skip the third one because that's familiar to friends. For number four, if you are familiar with the stats on how many businesses are owned by former foster youth, type yes. If you know how many businesses are owned by former foster youth people, and even foster youth, right? They own businesses. If you know how many are, just type yes. If you're familiar with stats on former foster youth who live above the poverty line, they live above the poverty line, type me. And lastly, if you're familiar with stats on how many foster youth have built their own successful families. So they're out, they're either married, partnered, single, have children, their children are in school, they're doing well, their children have gone on to college. I mean, it's the story of societal success. Type yes. So when it comes, thank you, Thomas, you can take it off. When it comes to stories and narratives about the damnation, the struggle, the issue, the problem concerning the people that we serve, we are loaded to the teeth. We have narratives for days. But when it comes to stories of how the people that we serving are succeeding, collectively, we are empty-handed. So there's no possible way that we are creating equitable paths forward if we don't know where that's leading. Does that make sense to everybody? And so we have to do a better job of investing in and looking at what works. What are the aspirations, inspirations, and hopes of the people that we are serving? Because we are blindly and unintentionally, most of us, 99% of us, unintentionally contributing to the social inequities facing the people that we're serving, no matter who they are, because we are essentially a part of the system. Does that make sense? And so when they are introduced to us, what story is being painted, what picture is being painted, and what path are we leading them on? And if we don't know, then we are really not leading them to a true path of equity. And so for the first couple of positive narratives that I put out there, there are about 28 states that have funding for children who are above 18 and are in the foster care system. And so statistics show that youth who remain in the system till about 21 do far better than the youth who are let out at 18. And so if we know that, gap works from 18 to 21, where are our investments in that age, right? If statistically we can see that there's no homelessness, they get a job, accept college degree, et cetera, why aren't we investing in that range? Does that make sense? Like the data is showing it, we don't know the data, but we're not investing in it. Two, surveyed across the country, about 84% of foster youth want to go to college. But that desire to go to college is not matched with the resources to send people to college. Does that make sense? They want to go to school. They want to be successful. The resources are not there for them to do so. The last three stats, I have no idea what they are because I looked over and over and over and could not find it. There's no collective data that speaks to the equitable outcomes of the people that we're serving. And if this was any type of business model, it would fail. If we presented this to investors, we will be thrown out of the room. We will be laughed out of the room. Why would I invest millions of dollars in you and you're not working? But yet social services, children's services gets billions of dollars a year, and for what?
Right. One of the things I wanted to highlight along with those points, Benjamin, is that we don't tell the story about how many families are unified.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And the beautiful component when that happens, as well as we don't talk enough about how many children were prevented from going into foster care, how many children were given the supports and the families were given the supports they needed to get through some of those economic stressors and life moments that tend to transform families and separate families. We don't tell those stories because and for the life of me, I can't give a good reason why. So with that said, we're coming up about the last 10 minutes and we want to give an opportunity to all of you to speak. Like I said earlier, we need everybody in this fight. It can't just be a few of us. Yeah. It can't just be a certain group of people, a certain race or a certain class. It has to be, everybody has to play a role. And so I'd love to give opportunity for all of you to ask some questions. I see a couple that are coming in. The other thing that I would love to give you is that I don't know if you all see a participant with her two children and on this call at the same time. It absolutely warms my heart to see somebody raising children and then at the same time they're still participating in this. That beautiful, absolutely. That beautiful image and the warmth that we get from those kinds of images needs to be the kind of warmth that everyone has for every child that's born and that we serve. I think those are really the goals that we're aiming for. And I think that's how we're going to ultimately start to see some change. So let's
Thomas, if I can just add one last thing concerning storytelling,
Yeah.
I'm an actor as well. I'm in Hollywood. I'm a master at telling stories. I get paid to do so. And so in any story, there is a problem, a villain, a hero, and a common goal. In a lot of the foster stories that are told in Hollywood, the parent who wants their child back is the villain. When we talk about stigmatizing narratives, once stigma attached to something, so many things. So that, we have to start telling our own stories. Just like in this fight, Black people are fighting to tell our own stories. In the work that we do, we have to start telling our own stories in our own ways that work. I didn't know that people reunified with their families within like 1 to 2 years. I didn't know that till I started doing the Friends research. And so when you think about it, losing Isaiah and all of the Lifetime stories, and yes, it's time for new stories, Sarah. It's time for our stories. The parent who wants their child back is always the villain in these stories. Think about that.
That's right.
So that's a narrative they want to push. That's not a narrative we ought to be pushing. Right. Go ahead, Thomas.
Sure. So let's answer a couple of these questions. The first was, it's important for those of us who are in the foster care industry to stay and keep attempting to change the story from the inside. Do you see that as complicity, something we struggle with? I don't see it as complicity. I do see it as something we do struggle with, because I think we have learned to tell stories of deficit, and we stigmatize our families in order to raise money. We feel like that's the paradigm for success. And we have to start getting we have to start getting people to want to fund things that are going to show how beautiful and resilient our families, in spite of all the obstacles that are before them. So for example, instead of telling a story about a young mother who's living in poverty and is about to lose their housing, how about telling the story about a mother who knows how to stretch $20 over the course of the weekend to take care of 2 kids, and they have a slumlord that has a $4,000 deposit hanging over their head if they try to find safer and healthier conditions to raise their children. I mean, I think we have to find better ways. I don't know if that's the absolute best way, but I think we have to find better ways to tell the stories so we can show how really strong and deserving the people we serve are, instead of how much they lack.
And Thomas, that kind of answers Debbie's question on how do we encourage the paths to positive outcomes without creating any villains. To your point you just made in that story, the $4,000 deposit, that's the villain. And that's a common goal everybody wants to overcome.
That's right. That's right.
So we have to start telling the truth about the villain. The villain is the system. The villain is the systemic barriers that keep people from achieving their goal. That's the story that needs to be told. And I guarantee you, Hollywood would love to talk about a slumlord in this climate. So,
that's right. Jocelyn Nguyen asks, do you have advice for parents and or teachers on next steps in engaging in justice for foster youth and the foster care system? Well, that's a big, beautiful question. Let me just speak from an educator standpoint. The other day I was at a rally, and there was a high school teacher that was talking about how great that they finally instituted a multicultural class for their 11th graders, and how that was a huge change in their district. And for me, I said, that's great, but is a little too late? There needs to be, and I know this has been an old conversation, an overhaul of our curriculum. I think, Benjamin, you mentioned it earlier. Children need to learn about themselves and others from pre-K all the way until graduation of high school. It needs to be so embedded in how they learn about themselves and others that it doesn't become an elective class you take in 11th grade. It becomes a part of their acculturation and growth and development over time to become critical and thoughtful thinkers. I think that's one. I think the other part of dealing with foster parents and teachers, I think we also have to, when I think about all of the foster youth that I've come in contact with, the number one thing that jumps out at me, aside from all the typical things we gravitate to, is what is their self-concept about themselves? How are we helping them learn to love themselves? And then how are we helping them to be? The most ridiculous question we ask kids all the time is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And really the answer should be, I just want to be myself. And if you want to know what they want to do, that's a whole nother conversation. But when it comes to the issue of being, we want people to grow up to be whatever they're supposed to be, and do it without fear or threat or possible, frowns with someone else not agreeing to what that may look like. All right, let's
along those lines, Thomas, teachers are special. My mom's a teacher, two of my aunts are teachers, and your role goes beyond what the job description said. And so you're fighting internally your school system, and then you're fighting the school district system. And so, every voice counts, right? And the more people you get behind your fight, it makes it much more impactful. But as far as, foster youth and having them hear and see from themselves, do a little bit extra and bring guests, speakers into the classroom if that is possible, right? Successful business owners, folks who are working everyday lives, people who just have stories about their experience in the foster care system and how, the life that sometimes we have to go the extra step above and beyond our job description in order to make sure that child is served. That's equity, speaking directly to their needs.
Absolutely. Debbie asked, how do we encourage the path to positive outcomes without creating any villains, whether the parent or others? Benjamin, I'm going to defer to you on this one in a second, but I'll give a quick response. I don't know if it's possible. I think there's always going to be some villains in a failing system. But you know what we have to do is prevent the villains from being those who are the most conspicuous to all of our eyes. When I say the most conspicuous, the easy scapegoat for all of our societal ills are Black skins and police uniforms. And because those are so conspicuous, they're easy to point out, we don't see all the forces behind that help create those scapegoats. We don't look at all of the things that gone into the reason why the police are militarized. We don't look into some of the legislation that puts a high precedent on policing certain communities over other, and looking at arrest records and how those are given, how police are awarded for high arrest records. And of course, if you want to, and how that's incentivized. And when we think about scapegoats and you think about, again, failing schools, you think about neighborhoods don't have all the resources and enormous obstacles and barriers. We don't look at all the forces behind those neighborhoods. We look at the people because it's so easy to jump on the person and individual. We don't think about the larger social structure that's created those conditions that prevents those people from thriving. So we've got to be able to look beyond the most conspicuous things and look behind the curtain and raise the veil on the larger component.
And this is where research comes in, and it almost answers the question from Lauren, who says, how do we set up measures, evaluation systems to show what didn't happen? How many kids were prevented from entering foster care, prevented from homelessness? This may be an area where we need support from academia. And the research and the numbers will help tell the story. And so correctly identifying the villain requires additional research to find out what contributing factors were included in the overall story of that individual family. And Lauren, to your point, right at the point where decisions are being made of whether a child should go into foster care, not go into foster care, research needs to be collected at that data point. Does that make sense? And so we may need to call on academia. We may need to raise funds to get researchers, but that's where investments need to be made if we want to, again, taking it back to just a business model. Your business model has to be created in such a way where it spits out success and it gets you to your ultimate goal. And if you're creating a business model and you don't know what gets you to your ultimate goal, that's where your investment needs to be. And funds need to be raised to speak to that point.
So we are at our time. Be happy to go over, but for those that have to move along to other meetings, I just want to finish this thought with you. First of all, I want to thank you all for joining. We will have another to answer that question, and we'll love to attend another one of these meetings, and we may invite a few more folks to join us. But one of the things I wanted to share with you is this interesting analogy used some years ago when understanding the issues of race. And it comes from actually a Native American way of thinking. And so A gentleman by the name of Felix Cohen wrote in 1953 about how Native Americans used canaries to be able to understand the conditions in mines to see whether or not they were healthy enough for people to be within those mines. And of course, we all may know the story that if the canary dies in the mine, then you know that the conditions for the other folks in the mine are soon to change very rapidly, and their health is also in jeopardy. And so Lonnie Goodyear wrote some years ago about how the issue of race is the canary in the mind. If we don't address what is happening to the most vulnerable in our society, the canaries in our society, it will ultimately determine the fate of everyone else. And so again, as friends as all of you being a part of this, you guys have already bought in to a large degree. The question now is, how do we get more and more people involved and thinking about these things in close proximity to one another to feel that we all have a stake in this, that the conditions of one represent the conditions of all. Just like that great maxim, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. This is one of those moments. And so we still have a lot of work to do. And I hope that you all continue to be a part of this fight, and we need you a part of this fight. Ben?
The system has been working for who it's supposed to work for hundreds of years. We can't take on the system individually. It is way too big. When I'm out in the street encouraging freedom fighters, I'm like, breathe one thing at a time. The question is, what can you do within the realm of your influence and your power? And if you are not contributing every day for the fight of mankind, because essentially that's what it is, then you are not contributing to a more prosperous and caring future for our country and for our world. Everybody has to take individual ownership of this and figure out what can I do, and then what can I contribute to a collective energy? What is the collective doing in my community? What is the collective doing in my space of work? What is the collective doing, in my family? So we have an individual responsibility and a collective responsibility as human beings for the fight of mankind. If it's not you today, it could be you tomorrow. And the wonderful thing about Black folks is we're contributing to every fight. We fought in the Civil War. We fought for women to have rights, and Black people couldn't vote. We're fighting everybody's fight. And that's just a blessing of who we are as a people. We can't change it. It's been that way. But the question is, who is going to show up for us in this time and space?
Well, I wanted to say, I hope you all have a great day, great week, and look forward to seeing many of you very soon. And if we have not met, I encourage you to please reach out to us here at Friends of the Children Los Angeles. I'd love to meet with you, share more about our work, and learn more about your work. We have to create a village effect here in Los Angeles and abroad. And so we are eager to do that with you. The collaborative spirit is strong in this organization. And so to all of you, thank you again for joining. And we will let you know soon about our next steps and how we continue to move forward. Thank you so much for joining. Appreciate all the comments and the questions. Love everything that I see posted here. I see posts still going up. We will take a lot of this fiery spirit and apply it every day in our work. Thank you so much for coming.